Welcome back to Morning Joe. We're here with former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara. His new book is entitled Doing Justice, and we're going to get to that in 1 second, Preet, but I've got to ask you the most important question of the morning. Do you watch Billions?
Yeah, I'm not caught up. I have watched the show. I love that that the lead is played by noted Indian-American actor Paul Giamatti, who's a very colorful United States attorney in the Southern District of New York. It's a very fun show, but it's highly fictionalized.
Highly fictionalized, just like House of Cards, right?
Yes, in many respects, both professional and personal, it's very fictionalized.
Yes, I can understand why you would say that. You obviously are not the inspiration for Giamatti's character, correct?
I believe that we share the same position. I in reality, he on television, and by position I mean professional position.
Okay, very good. The question has been asked. I've just got to go back. I've just got to go back and ask you about the Justice Department guideline, and then I promise after this, questions only about the book, everybody. But I think you and I would, if our constitutional law professor had asked us in class about what we thought about a president not being able to be indicted while he's a sitting president, and that if he got reelected, some of those guidelines, some of those statutes of limitations would run, and so by being reelected, you would escape justice. We could be twisted around to the point, and you know where it ends. Well, what if a president shoots somebody on Fifth Avenue and he has a Congress that won't impeach him? Do those guidelines allow a president to get away with murder?
Yeah, look, I don't disagree that there's a very good argument that the Constitution does not preclude a sitting president from being prosecuted, indicted, and convicted. I think that's open for debate. I think probably the better argument, I'm with you, also depending on the seriousness of the crime. It seems unbelievable, and I always put in this caveat when I'm talking about Bob Mueller and whether or not he would indict a sitting president. I think if he has proof beyond a reasonable doubt of a campaign finance violation or some form of obstruction, would he rip the country apart on the basis of a charge that would have to rely on flouting a Department of Justice policy? I don't think so. If, on the other hand, hypothetically, if there was evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the President of the United States had in fact shot someone in cold blood on Fifth Avenue, I think he might indict. And so there comes a point when you have a degree of seriousness and a degree of proof with respect to even a sitting president that a policy that may not be wise needs to fall. I just don't think we're there.
On a follow-up on the idea of the Department of Justice guidelines, if this is indeed the end game of the Mueller investigation, we don't know that it is, what he received from the president was written responses to written questions, that there was no other interview. Are you surprised that he would settle for that he wouldn't take extra steps to try to get more from the president rather than what we assume were highly lawyered answers to a handful of written questions?
Yeah, I think any prosecutor, including the special counsel, who's the best among us, would want direct testimony where you can ask follow-up questions and you could get behind the lawyered answers, as you call them, but you take what you can get. And sometimes there's a posture that causes a person not to want to come in, not to want to talk, and to try to compel testimony seems odd because he's a subject and potentially a target. On top of which, you could sort of muck that up for a long period of time and have to go to court. And I think whether or not Bob Mueller is on the cusp of being finished, I think he wants to be finished at the earliest possible moment. I don't think he needs this in his life for a number of years going forward, both for personal and professional reasons. And so if it was going to be a hard-fought court battle to get answers from the president for months or years, he probably thought it wasn't worth it.
So the Southern District is now under a spotlight like never before, but it's always been one of the highest profile attorneys, U.S. Attorney's Office in the country. What did you find your most challenging moments in managing that office? Because you were under press scrutiny, but when you go into your book, like, what do you feel like Doing Justice has really turned out to be all about?
Yeah, so as I say in the book, I talk about the Southern District of New York, which I think is a very special place where I worked. And I tell stories about a lot of people. People knew my name because my name was on all the indictments, and I announced cases, and people knew who the leader of the office was. But I think more special than that, are all the unsung heroes, investigators, and others who did the hard work every day, who tried to keep people safe, who tried to hold people accountable in a way that was honorable. I mean, we had this phrase that I inherited when I was in the office, this sort of mission statement, which was, your job is one thing, to do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons every day, just that, no matter what. And I heard that when I was a line prosecutor when I was young. I told that to the prosecutors in my office. My successor, I'm certain, is telling that to the line prosecutors there. So the challenge is to make sure that you don't feel let down by the fact that you're dealing with the worst of humanity every day. You're dealing with people who rob, who steal, who kill, who want to terrorize Americans. But at the same time, your job is to do the right thing and to bring justice. The job of the prosecutor that I try to explain, and people may not always appreciate, is not to put people in prison. That is not the job. That is an incidental effect of what the job really is, which is to do justice. And I think at a time that we're in now, where people are talking about truth not being truth and alternative facts, we need to take a step back and think about what justice means, how it's accomplished, how good people can be fair-minded, how you don't have bias, and that's what that book is about.
In the book, you address sentencing, and it's one of the great misnomers in the American justice system, and it goes in waves, as we all know. In the early 90s, there were sentencing reforms, state and federal. We now have mandatory minimums in some jurisdictions. What can we do to even out the sentencing disparities that are inherent in the justice system?
I think it's good to talk about them. I think it's good to analyze court decisions. I think, sometimes on some things, with respect to mandatory minimums, Congress should act. Not that long ago, people thought you could never, make more equal and more fair the sentencing disparities between crack and powder cocaine. That was accomplished. It's not equal yet, but that was able to be done. There's this inherent tension between wanting uniformity and consistency in sentencing around the country. So if you're arrested in Oregon or you're arrested in New York, you should face the same sentence if you're similarly situated. On the other hand, you also have this really important principle of justice that I also talk about in the book, of individualized justice. You look at the particular person, what they have done, what the other circumstances are, and those two things are in tension, and they're kind of hard to resolve, which is why it's a very, very tough thing to, I think, do perfect sentencing.
And criminal justice reform is one of the rare places where the White House and Democrats in Congress have gotten together during these first couple of years. The book is Doing Justice, a prosecutor's thoughts on crime, punishment, and the rule of law. Preet Bharara, who reminds us that Paul Giamatti's account is highly fictionalized, particularly those personal peccadillos.
Yes.
And
Thanks, Willie, for making that clear.
Yes.
Various members of my family appreciate that.
It's an important distinction to make. Thanks so much, Preet.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.